name is Janelle Croshaw Ralla, and I'm a visual effects supervisor. Most recently, I was the second unit and additional visual effects supervisor on Captain Marvel under Chris Townsend, who likes to go by Christopher. And I've been visual effects supervising for the last 10 years, and I've been in visual effects for the last 20. So in Captain Marvel, I started in the first day of the main unit shoot, even though I was going to be supervising second unit. So I was on, mostly from the beginning, I wasn't on the initial prep, but right away was on, dove right into second unit prep, which started about 8 weeks later, the second unit shoot. I think there was about 40 second unit shoot days. I also filled in for Christopher. As you know, the Marvel post schedules are really short. We had a little over 6 months, so there were a lot of turnovers happening while we were shooting. And so Christopher would always have to go and do CineSyncs, and I would cover for him on main unit. And after the shoot, we went straight into post, and in post, I was actually the supervisor for several different vendors: Luma, Lola, Screen Scene, Rising Sun Pictures I took over from Chris, and Exceptional Minds along with our in-house team. So we had roughly 2,400 shots, and he and I split them roughly, and of course everything funneled through him at the end of the day. When Chris approached me about overseeing the de-aging work for Sam Jackson, I was ecstatic because it's right up my alley with some of the digital human work that I've done in the past, even though it's almost opposite spectrum because it's not fully digital heads. It's still keeping character continuity, for more or less a digital asset throughout the whole film, and so I was really excited about that. So when I came on, Lola had already done a test for Chris. He's done a lot of work with Lola in the past, and they've done some beautiful work on much smaller characters in films. And their test was what convinced the filmmakers to actually, even go through with this. The interesting thing about their test, when they had Sam over to, their studio to recite a few lines from different angles, he was in the best shape. He was standing up straight, with this really great shirt on that made it easier to do the modifications that needed to happen, and the test looked beautiful. And when it comes to the shoot, and he's in character, and just the day-to-day of shooting a film, some of the wardrobe, he starts to look different from shot to shot. And it's interesting how different lighting, who knows what he ate the night before, just as human beings, we look different in different scenarios. And so it became a real challenge to figure out how we were going to make the continuity work and make him actually look the same, throughout the film. And so what we started to do was take a look at the entire film, a very early cut. It was probably 3 hours long. And we took screen grabs of every single shot and started to almost make contact sheets of all of these shots and start to look at the big picture. And that's just a technique that I usually do with any character that I'm working on. It's a little bit old school, but I'll even have them printed out, and so I have every frame of the movie that he's in surrounding me to help the editors, help Chris to know which scenes we need to start turning over and working on, so that we have a little bit of him from the entire movie, if that makes sense, in all different scenarios. So in the past, Lola and Chris had always had a double that they would use for texture and for body if needed. But this time around, because there was so many shots, there was 500 that ended up in the film. I think we worked on roughly 800. It just was not possible with the shooting schedule to have a double and to shoot 2 takes. Luckily, with Samuel L. Jackson, he's aged extremely well. And so instead of it becoming removing wrinkles and changing skin tone and needing that texture, the texture of his face is beautiful. And so it was more about almost collagen filling and, gravity adjustments. And, so we started there, and that was, so that was we worked directly on top of the plates. And I think that there were 3D tracks for most shots. We ended up having 3 vendors at the end of the day. So Lola was the lead vendor. They had roughly 315 SAM shots. Rising Sun Pictures had about 115, I want to say, and Screen Scene Visual Effects had 30 or so. And they all had some hero shots. And so that was, they each had different techniques that they used. I think at the beginning, you have to establish a language that is the adjustments that we're doing to make the younger Sam. Because at the end of the day, we referenced several different movies. We mostly, on the client side at least, referenced Sphere, Die Hard with a Vengeance, The Negotiator. I think Lola referenced a lot this movie called 187. But at the end of the day, what you're making is Nick Fury in Captain Marvel. And so just like an actor looks different in almost every movie that he's in, we're establishing this look of how he looks in Captain Marvel. And so some of those first shots actually took a long time. And some of those first shots actually went all the way until the end even, because we would end up doing them over once we got the others up to that certain look. And so I guess back to how do you ensure the continuity, I think you start with the base adjustments that we would make, whether it's removing any marionette lines, lessening the nasolabial folds, sculpting a little bit more of a jawline, and then you really can get into really finite notes. It's just comparing between him and the plate, comparing between one vendor's shot and another vendor's shot in different scenes or shots that are right next to each other. And sometimes those notes were, to literally move up the lower eyelid like 0.5 millimeter, just a couple pixels, and all of a sudden it would give him a lighter, younger appearance, or feel for the scene. And it's interesting because I know Lola's approach, they have artists who've been doing this for probably almost decades, and their team, especially by the end, was really good at knowing what he looked like, because by the end, each one of those artists, I don't know exactly how many they had, but they'd done so many shots that they were faster at getting him to where he needed to go. I think, and they have mostly a flame workflow, and so I, in my head at least, think of it more like an artist sculpting, where Rising Sun, and I think more Screen Scene as well, they have a nuke workflow, and it's a little more procedural. And we did give them quite a bit of reference. And their nuke workflow that was procedural, it's interesting because I think moving forward, those procedural workflows, there's a lot to them, and being able to automate, can go a long way for getting a really good base. But then you're still going to need the artistry at the end to have the artist who has the meticulous eye to take it home and do those fine changes. I found the same thing in Benjamin Button with Digital Humans, that you really need that base that's the technical automated base, and then you have the compositor who is just doing those last fine tunes that get you out of the uncanny valley. I tend to be over planning, micromanaging, what is the word? But in the beginning, again, going back to just taking the 3-hour-long cut and finding out, and it wasn't just me, there was several coordinators, helping with this process, but finding out how many shots we have, really looking at the turnover schedule, looking at how long these shots are taking the vendors to turn around, and how many revisions, notes I can give, and really looking at that very early on so that we know that we'll finish, 6 months from now. So I wasn't too scared. I thought that I kind of always knew that it was going to look great at the end, that it's sometimes not easy getting there. And sometimes there's a lot of, you hit little plateaus where you're like, okay, you're wanting to see some of the shots that were turned over a long time ago and you're not seeing them, and but you just have to put the trust in the vendors that, and nudge them, to keep turning over certain shots. And so I always had faith that we were going to get there, because same as with the other digital humans I've done, you can't fail, because if you fail, then you're like this commercial that I did a long time ago where I recreated Orville Redenbacher, and everyone called him Orville Dedenbacher, and they pulled it from the air. So that was not mine, it was a whole team, but that was our failure. And, since then, I think just over-planning is a good thing when you're dealing with human beings. For me, sometimes the most challenging part is actually communicating what I'm seeing, and communicating that in a very effective way to the vendors or whoever's receiving the notes that is positive and productive and is going to get us a very linear result. I think that's actually one of the things that tends to be one of the bigger challenges for me. Surprised, no, because Marvel's never failed. So I was incredibly proud of the film and incredibly happy that it's been successful. And I think the best moments are when people come up to me, they're young women, and say that it changed their life and they cried, or dads who say, oh my gosh, my daughter, is away at college and she's seen it 3 times, and knowing that it's making that sort of difference in people's lives is pretty cool, to be a part of a film like that. I took the unusual path of leaving school and taking on an illegal internship, but learning on the job. Shortly after that, I was a fine artist. I guess you could call me a fine artist, but I was an artist my whole life, and just loved making art, but was not a digital artist in any way. And when I found out what it even was, I started to take classes in Photoshop and Illustrator, and that's when someone introduced me to Lightwave 3D. And shortly after that internship, I moved to Los Angeles, and shortly after that, in 1999, I was hired at Digital Domain, and I think I was 19 years old. And I've worked at Digital Domain on and off for the last 20 years. They're still like family to me. So that was a really great run at Digital Domain. Eric Barbara mentored me, and we worked on a lot of the David Fincher projects. And David Fincher has a very meticulous eye, and he would sit there in reviews and gamma up the monitor and go frame by frame in the red, green, and blue channel and just pick apart these frames. And I don't think he does that anymore, but that's what he did way back when. And so it really kind of put me through boot camp, and that's that's how I started to love visual effects. And that's when I was doing a lot of 3D at the time, and more of a generalist. And I was starting to be pushed into being a compositor because of the good eye that I had, apparently. And so from there, I started doing composite supervisor for Zodiac and Benjamin Button. And let's see, from there I went and actually met Spike Jonze and started working for him, which was really great, and that opened up a lot of doors and opportunities. From there, I started going to the client side, and it's been this path, this pretty straight path towards visual effects supervising. And when I've done smaller films, I've also done a little bit of producing, but I think I'm more of like a creative producer. But the supervising aspect of it was always more appealing to me, because when it came, as much as I like to know the numbers and the scheduling, I don't think I'm particularly good at it. And so it was always more fun to finish the art, you know? And then when I started to go on set, and, you know, I got really hooked, because that's, you know, to be able to have a job where you're prepping, and then you're out with this whole team, you know, shooting this film and making a film, and then you're in post with all these different teams, you know, and then the final product goes up, you know, on the big screen. Like, it's just this arc that there's really nothing like it. And so I knew it was what I wanted to do. I was given a lot of really bad advice over the years when I was first getting into this and wanted to be a leader. And some of the bad advice that I was given, and this is why I loved Captain Marvel so much, because I could relate to her, was, you know, you're too emotional. You can't be so emotional. I don't think that these people would say that to anyone these days, you know, but 15 years ago, you know, you're too emotional, you need to fit in more, you know, you can't be so dramatic, you're over delivering, you know, because I would always want the imagery to be perfect. And I think the best advice that I would give someone now, because it took me many years to actually, I would say, find myself, because I spent a lot of years going, oh geez, I better get in line and be one of the guys and put my emotions in check. And I questioned kind of who I was. I think I was actually pretty confused. And, you know, the advice I would give to people these days, which I don't think that they really need it, because there's so much uniqueness out there these days, but that's just to be yourself and be confident in yourself. And, you know, don't let anyone change who you are if it feels right inside. And, you know, there are some good advice that I was given as well, is to just go with the flow. I am a big fan of going with the flow a little bit more, and I think that I used to try to fight quite a bit to find my place, and now I'm finding that it's not necessary to fight as much, you know, that if something's really hard and I'm having to fight, I probably need to go and find something else, you know, and so I tend to go with the flow a little bit more.